पोएम का नाम है द ग्रम्बलिंग हाइव और Knaves turned honest. A spacious hive well stocked with bees that live it in luxury and ease, and yet as famed for laws and arms as yielding large and early swarms, was counted the great nursery of sciences and industry. No bees had better government, more fickleness, or less content. They were not slaves to tyranny, nor ruled by wild democracy, but kings that could not wrong because their power was circumscribed by laws. These insects lived like men, and all our actions they performed in small. They did whatever done in town, and what belongs to sword or gown. Thou artful works by nimble sleight of minute limbs capped human sight. Yet we've no engines, labourers, ships, castles, arms, artificers, craft, science, shops, or instrument, but they had an equivalent, which since their language is unknown, must be called as we do our own. As grant that amongst other things, they wanted dice, yet they had kings. And those had guards from whence we may justly conclude they had some play, unless a regiment be shown of soldiers that make use of none. Vast numbers thronged the fruitful hive, yet those vast numbers made them thrive. Millions endeavouring to supply each other's lust and vanity, while other millions were employed to see their handiworks destroyed. They finished half the universe, yet had more work than labourers. Some with vast stocks and little pains jumped with business of great gains, and some were damned to scythes and spades and all those hard labourers' trades, were willing wretches daily sweat and wear out strength and limb to eat, while others followed mysteries to which few folks bind prentices, that want no stock but that of brass, and may set up without a cross, as sharpers, parasites, pimps, players, pickpockets, coiners, quacks, soothsayers, and all those that in enmity with downright working cunningly convert to their own use the labour of their good-natured, heedless neighbour. These were called knaves, but bar the name, the grave industrious were the same. All trades and places knew some cheat, no calling was without deceit. यानी कि एक हाइव है बीज की जो ये सारे काम करते हैं, सारे चीटर्स हैं, सारे एक दूसरे का फ़ायदा भी उठाते हैं, मगर सारे मुख्तलिफ़ किस्म के काम कर रहे हैं और सेल्फिश भी हैं और सब कुछ है, ठीक है, मगर सारे काम कर रहे हैं मुख्तलिफ़ किस्म के. The lawyers of whose art the basis was raising feuds and splitting cases, opposed all registers that cheats might make more work with dipped estates. As weren't laws unlawful that one's own without a lawsuit should be known, they kept off hearings willfully to finger the refreshing fee, and to defend a wicked cause examined and surveyed the laws, as burglars shops and houses do to find out where they'd best break through. Physicians, ये lawyers को describe करता है कि lawyers इस किस्म के थे. Physicians valued fame and wealth above the drooping patient's health. ये तो पाकिस्तानी डॉक्टर्स की बात कर रहा है. Or their own skill the greatest part, studying instead of rules of art, grave pensive looks and dull behaviour to gain the apothecary's favour, the praise of midwives, priests, and all that served at birth or funeral, to bear with their ever talking tribe, and hear my lady aunt prescribe, with formal smile and kind, how'd ye to fawn on all the family, and which of all the greatest curse is to endure the impertinence of nurses. So doctors भी जो थे वो भी बड़े बेकार किस्म के थे. Among a priest की बारी शुरू होती है. Amongst the many priests of Hive heard to draw blessings from above, some few would learned and eloquent, but thousands hot and ignorant. ज़्यादातर priest जो थे वो भी जाहिल किस्म के लोग थे. Yet all passed muster that could hide their sloth, lust, avarice, and pride, for which they were as famid as tailors for cabbage or for brandy sailors. Some meagre looked and meanly clad would mystically pray for bread, meaning by that an ample store, yet literally received no more. And while these holy drudges starved, the lazy ones for which they had served indulged their ease with all the graces of health and plenty in their faces. खूब खाबे खा रहे थे, enjoy कर रहे थे. ठीक है, किसी को खास परवाह नहीं थी कि लोग मर रहे हैं, जी रहे हैं. The soldiers that were forced to fight, if they survived, got honor by it. Though some that shunned the blood fray had limbs shot off that ran away. Some valiant generals fought the foe, others took bribes to let them go. Some ventured always where it was warm, lost now a leg and then an arm. Till quite disabled and put by, they lived on half their salary, while others never came in play and stayed at home for double pay. ठीक है, सोल्जर्स जो थे वो भी कोई ख़ास बहादुर नहीं थे, बस नॉर्मल किस्म के लोग थे, कोशिश करते थे वॉर को अवॉइड ही किया जाए. Their kings were served but knavishly, cheated by their own ministry. Many that for their welfare slaved, robbing the very crown they saved. Pensions were small and they lived high, yet boasted of their honesty, calling whenever they strained their right, the slippery trick a prerequisite. And when folks understood they can't, they chanted that for emolument, willing to be short or plain in anything concerning gain. For there was not a bee but would get more, I won't say, than he should. But then he daren't to let them know that paid for it as their gamesters do, that though at fair play never will own before the losers that they've won. But who can call their frauds repeat? The very stuff which in the street they sold for dirt enriched the ground was often by the buyers found, sophisticated with a quarter of good-for-nothing stones and mortar, who flail had cause to mutter, who sold the other salt for butter. Justice herself, famed for fair dealing, by blindness had not lost her feeling. Her left hand, which the scales should hold, had often dropped them bribed with gold. And though she'd seemed impartial where punishment was corporal, pretended to be to a regular course in murder and all crimes of force. Though some first pilloried for cheating were hanged in hem for their own beating, yet it was thought the sword she bore, दूसरे हाथ में sword है ना, checked but the desperate and the poor, that urged by more necessity were tied up to the wretched tree for crimes which not deserved that fate, but to secure the rich and the great. गरीबों को मार देते थे वगैरह वगैरह, ये justice का हाल था. Thus every part was full of vice, yet the whole mass a paradise. Flattered in peace and feared in wars, they were the esteem of foreigners, and lavish all their wealth and lives, the balance of all other hives. Such were the blessings of that state, their crimes conspired to make them great. And virtue, who from politics had learnt 1,000 cunning tricks, was by their happy influence made friends with vice, and ever since, the worst of all the multitude did something for the common good. यानी कि सारे उल्लू के पट्टे थे, और cheaters थे, और crooks थे, और ये सब कुछ थे. Yet, सोसाइटी जो थी बाकी सारी हाइव से बड़ी बेहतर चल रही थी, और लोग उनसे डरते भी थे, घबराते भी थे. This was the state's craft that maintained, the whole of which each part complained. हर पार्ट कंप्लेंट करता था मगर स्टेट बड़ा सही चल रहा था. This was in music harmony, made jarrings in the main agree. Parties directly opposite assist each other as they were for spite, and temperance with sobriety served drunkenness and gluttony. The root of evil, avarice, that damned, ill-natured, baneful vice, was slave to prodigality, that noble sin, while luxury employed 1,000,000 of the poor, and odious price 1,000,000 more. Envy itself and vanity were ministers of industry, their darling folly fickleness in diet, furniture, and dress. That strange ridiculous vice was made the very wheel that turneth the trade. Their laws and clothes were equally objects of mutability. For what was well done for a time in half a year became a crime. And while they'd alter thus their laws, still finding and correcting flaws, they mended by inconstancy faults which no prudence could foresee. वो जो लग्जरी वाले लोग थे जो सारी अजीबो गरीब किस्म की हरकतें कर रहे थे, वो मिलियंस ऑफ लोगों को एम्प्लॉय कर रहे थे और नए नए फैशंस बना रहे थे, और उनकी वजह से नई नई क्राफ्ट्स और स्किल्स डेवलप हो रही थी. Thus vice, nursed ingenuity, which joined with time and industry, had carried life's conveniences, its real pleasures, comforts, ease, to such a height the very poor live it better than the rich before, and nothing could be added more. How vain is mortal happiness! Had they but known the bounds of bliss, and that perfection here below is more than gods can well bestow. The grumbling brutes had been content with ministers and government, but they at every ill success, like creatures lost with redress, cursed politicians, armies, fleets, हर वक्त सियासतदानों पे वो गालियां दे रहे होते थे, ये ठीक नहीं करते, while everyone cried, damn the cheats, and would, though conscious of his own, in other barbarously bear none. ठीक है, यानी कि खुद अपनी दफ़ा नहीं ठीक अपने आप को करते थे, मगर सारी सोसाइटी को, मुझे तो ऐसा लगता है पाकिस्तान की बात हो रही, गालियाँ निकाल रहे होते थे कि सियासतदान भी करप्ट हैं, फौज भी करप्ट है, सारे करप्ट हैं, ठीक हो जाना चाहिए, करप्शन ख़त्म होनी चाहिए. One that had got a princely store by cheating master, king, and poor, dared cry aloud, the land must sink for all its fraud, and whom do you think the sermonizing rascal child, a Glover that sold lamb for kid? The least thing was not done amiss, or crossed the public business. But all the rogues cried brazenly, good gods, had we but honesty. क्या यानी कि सब वो ये कह रहे थे कि काश हम बस ऑनेस्ट होते। आप हर वक्त ये बात सुनते रहते हैं कि पाकिस्तान का सबसे बड़ा मसला ये है कि हम क्या नहीं है, वफ़ादार नहीं, ईमानदार नहीं है, वगैरह वगैरह, हम सिंसियर नहीं है। मैं तो हर वक्त ये बात सुनता रहता हूँ। तो वो इसी तरह ये लोग भी कह रहे थे कि बस सिंसेरिटी होनी चाहिए, अगर सिंसेरिटी हो जाए, वफ़ादारी हो जाए, ऑनेस्टी हो जाए, सब ठीक हो जाएगा। Mercery smiled at the impudence, and others called it want of sense, always to rail at what they loved, but love with indignation moved, at last in anger swore he'd rid the bawling hive of fraud, and did, the very moment it departs, and honesty fills all their hearts. There shows them like the instructive tree, those crimes which they're ashamed to see, which now in silence they confess by blushing at their ugliness. Like children, that they would hide their faults, and by their colors own their thoughts, imagining when they're looked upon, that others see what they have done. But O ye gods, what consternation! How vast and sudden was the alteration. In half an hour the nation round, meat fell a penny in the pound. The masks, hypocrisies flung down from the great statesman to the clown, and some in borrowed looks well known appeared like strangers in their own. The bar was silent from that day, for now the willing debtors pay, even what's by creditors forgot, who quitted them that had it not. Those that were in the wrong stood mute, and dropped the patched vexation suit, on which since nothing less can thrive than lawyers in an honest hive, all except those that got enough with ink horns by their sides trooped off. यानी कि एकदम से उनमें एक transformation आई, and everybody became honest and sincere and good and virtuous. Justice hanged, some set others free, and after gold delivery, her presence being no more required, with all her train and pomp retired. First marched some smiths with locks and grates, fetters and doors with iron plates. Next gaolers, turnkeys and assistants, before the goddess at some distance, her chief and faithful minister. Squire Cash, the law's great finisher, bore not the imaginary sword, but his own tools and axe and cord. Then on a cloud the hood winked fair, Justice herself was pushed by air. About her chariot and behind were sergeants, bums of every kind, tipstaffs and all those officers that squeezed a living out of tears. Though physic lived while folks were ill, none would prescribe but bees of skill, which through the hive dispersed so wild that none of them had need to ride. Waved vain disputes and strove to free the patients of their misery, left drugs in cheating countries grown, and used the products of their own, knowing the God sent no disease to nations without remedies. Their clergy, roused from laziness, laid not their charge on journey bees, but served themselves exempt from vice, the gods with prayers and sacrifice, and all those that were fit or knew their services might be spared withdrew. Nor was there business for so many, if the honest stand in need of any. Few only with the high priest stayed, to whom the rest obedience paid. Himself employed in holy cares, resigned to others' state affairs. He chased no starveling from his doors, nor pinched the wages of the poor. But at his house the hungry is fed, the hirelings finds unmeasured bread, the needy traveller board and bed. Among the king's great ministers and all the inferior officers, the change was great, for frugally they now lived on their salary. That a poor bee should 10 times come to ask his due a trifling sum, and by some well-hired clerk be made to give a crown or never be paid, would now be called a downright cheat, though formerly a prerequisite. So everybody was getting their money on time, justice was working, priests were doing their job. थोड़ी सी जोर लगाना पड़ रहा है, मुझे पता है इस शायरी को समझने के लिए, बट पे अटेंशन, अभी मज़ा आएगा थोड़ा सा और इसको हम डिस्कस करेंगे कि वो क्या रहा है, क्या रहा है. All places managed first by three, who watched each other's knavery, and often for a fellow feeling promoted one another's stealing, are happy supplied by one, by which some 1,000 more are gone. No honor now could be content to live and owe for what was spent. Liveries in brokers' shops are hung. They part with coaches for a song. Sell stately horses by whole sets, and country houses to pay debts. Vain costs in shunned as much as fraud. They have no forces kept abroad. Laugh at the esteem of foreigners and empty glory got by wars. They fight but for their country's sake when right or liberty is at stake. So जंग के अंदर भी उन्होंने छोड़ दिया कि दौलत के लिए लड़ाई लड़नी है वगैरह, सिर्फ अपने कंट्री की लिबर्टी के लिए वो लड़ेंगे and so. Now, mind the glorious hive and see how honesty and trade agree. The show is gone, it thins apace, and looks with quite another face. For it was not only that they went, by whom vast sums were yearly spent, but multitudes that lived on them were daily forced to do the same. In vain to other trades they'd fled. All were overstocked accordingly. The price of land and houses falls. Miraculous palace whose walls, like those of Thebes, were raised by play, are to be let, while the once gay, well-seated household gods would be more pleased to expire in flames than see. The mean inscription on the door smile at the lofty ones they bore. The building trade is quite destroyed. Artificers are not employed. No limbers for his art is famed. Stone cutters, carvers are not named. Those that remained grew up temperate, strive not how to spend but how to live, and when they paid their tavern score, resolved to enter it no more. No vintner's jilt in all the hive could wear now clothes of gold and thrive, nor torkoal such as vast sums advance for Burgundy and Orleans. The courtier's gone, that with his miss supped at his house on Christmas peas, spending as much in 2 hours' stay as keeps a troop of horse a day. The haughty Chloe, to live great, had made her husband rob the state, but now she sells her furniture, which in the Indies had been ransacked for, contracts the expensive bill of fare, and wears a strong suit a whole year. The slight and fickle age is past, and clothes as well as fashions last. Weavers that joined rich silk with plate, and all the trades subordinate, are gone. Still peace and plenty reign, and everything is cheap though plain. Kind nature, free from gardener's force, allow all fruits in her own course, but rarities cannot be had, where pains to get them are not paid. As pride and luxury decrease, so by degrees they leave the seas. Not merchants now, but companies, remove whole manufactories. All arts and crafts neglected lie, content the bane of industry. Make them admire their honest homely store, and neither seek nor covet more. So few in the vast hive remain, the 100th part they can't maintain, against the insults of numerous foes, whom yet they valiantly oppose. Till some well-fenced retreat is found, and here they die or stand their ground. No hireling in their army known, but bravely fighting for their own. Their courage and integrity at last were crowned with victory. They triumphed not without their cost, for many thousand beads were lost, hardened with toils and exercise. They counted ease itself a vice, which so impoverished their temperance that to avoid extravagance they flew into a hollow tree, blessed with content and honesty. The moral of the story is, then leave complaints, fools, only strive to make a great and honest hive, to enjoy the world's conveniences, be famed in war, yet live in ease, without great vices, is a vain utopia seated in the brain. Fraud, luxury, and pride must live while we benefits receive. Hunger's a dreadful plague, no doubt, yet who digests or thrives without? Do we not owe the growth of wine to the dry, shabby, crooked vine, which while its shoots neglected stood, choked other plants and ran to wood, but blessed us with its noble fruit as soon as it was tied and cut? So vice is beneficial found when it's by justice lopped and bound. Nay, where the people would be great, as necessary to the state as hunger is to make them eat, barely virtue can't make nations live. In splendor they that would revive a golden age must be as free for acorns as for honesty. अब इस सारी पोएम का मतलब क्या है कि वो जो बड़ी डिब्बे शरीफ किस्म के लोग थे, उन्होंने जिस किस्म की वर्चुअस किस्म की इकोनॉमी बनाई, उसमें कोई लग्जरी नहीं थी, कोई सेल्फिशनेस नहीं थी, कोई सेल्फ डिज़ायर नहीं थी, ये सब चीज़ें नहीं थी, बड़े वर्चुअस किस्म के लोग थे. क्या वो कामयाब हुई? वो कहते हैं नहीं. He describes a bee community thriving until the bees are suddenly made honest and virtuous. Without their desire for personal gain, their economy collapses, and the remaining bees go to live simple lives in a hollow tree, but thus implying that without private vices, there exists no public benefit. Selfishness भी ज़रूरी है. The book was primarily written as a political satire in 1705. England की धज्जियाँ उड़ा रहा था वो. Mandeville disagreed, क्योंकि जो Christian economics थी उस ज़माने की जो कह रही थी ये नहीं करो, ये नहीं करो, ये नहीं करो, वगैरह वगैरह, उनके हवाले से वो ये कह रहा था कि अगर वो करने जो आप कहना चाह रहे हैं करना चाहिए तो ये तो इकोनॉमी सारी ठप हो जाएगी. Mandeville disagreed with the idea that education adds virtue because he did not believe that evil desires existed only in the poor, but rather he saw the educated and wealthy as much more crafty. वो भी बड़े ये नहीं है कि गरीब जो है वो crafty नहीं है, वो भी है, अमीर तो और भी ज़्यादा है. Mandeville also believed that educating the poor increased their desires for material things, defeating the purpose of the school and making it more difficult to provide for them. So, in sum, the moral of the story is, virtue is every performance by which man, contrary to the impulse of nature, should endeavor the benefit of others or the conquest of his own passions out of a rational ambition of being good. ठीक है? Virtue हम किस चीज़ को कहते हैं कि मैं अपनी मुफादात को छोड़ के आपके मुफादात के लिए काम करूं, आपके लिए काम करूं, मैं अपने आप को भूल जाऊं, मैं अपने आप को, मैं कोई सेल्फिश डिज़ायर अपने जहन में ना रखूं. इसी को वर्चुअसनेस कहते हैं ना. जब आप दूसरों के लिए काम करते हैं इसी को हम वर्चुअस कहते हैं कि नहीं. कहता है it is vices, the self-regarding action of men, which alone by means of inventions and the circulation of capital in connection with luxurious living stimulate society into action and progress. So actually virtue is bad, vice is good. Even though vice is bad, but all the vice put together, you people striving for a little bit of gain, etc., in a way that binds society, if you bind that society in a specific way, the chasing of individual interests leads to the larger, can lead to the larger collective good. Self-interest leads to public good. He writes, private vices are public benefits. This idea, the moral virtues are the political offspring which flattery begot upon pride. ये जो I think Mandeville has a point with respect to social media virtue signaling. Okay, you are kind of flattering yourself and your own pride by this virtue signaling that you're constantly doing. Yes. Selfishness, your own desires. You're supposed to leave your desire and become this virtuous person, not have any desire that is your desire, but you're supposed to serve others. He says, but your desire is what chases you after luxury and all of these other things, and fortune and fame and all these things. But that chasing after fame, fortune, luxury, etc., is what makes you industrious, makes you work hard for those things. So you can see the same argument in Adam Smith. Private vices by the dexterous management of a skillful politician may be turned into public benefits. That's his main argument. अगर politicians समझे इस बात को कि how to use your self-interest in such a way that the society as a whole benefits. That's what politics is really about. Mandeville's ideas about society and politics were praised by Frederick Hayek. ये पीछे खड़ा है. Keynes considered Mandeville as a precursor of the foundation of his own theory of insufficient effective demand. ये Keynes खड़ा है. Marx भी कहता है in Capital, Mandeville is an honest man with a clear mind for his conclusion that the wealth of society depended on the relative poverty of workers. So he influenced a whole number of people. Smith पे तो बहुत clearly आपको उसका invisible hand of the argument. It is not by the selflessness of the baker and butcher that you get your bread and meat. वो अपने सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट के लिए करता है, मीट बनाता है, ब्रेड बनाता है, आप अपने सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट के लिए खरीदते हैं, मगर उसी से इकोनॉमी जो है सारी चल रही है, सारी इकोनॉमी बेसिकली सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट पे चल रही है. सो दैट इज द बिग change that Mandeville introduced in economic thinking, interestingly, by writing this amazing poem. He changed the minds of so many economists into thinking this new argument, which is maybe selfishness is not always bad. Yes, sometimes it can also be bad, nobody denying that. But maybe it's not always a bad thing. Maybe it's not always a good thing either. But, but there is a role in human society for selfishness. There is also a role for selflessness. Both of these aspects of humanity are absolutely present in every individual and in every society. ये दोनों के बगैर नहीं सोसाइटी चल सकती. अगर सारे बिल्कुल सिर्फ सेल्फिश ही हो हर वक्त तब भी सोसाइटी नहीं चलने लगी, और सारे अगर हर वक्त सेल्फलेस ही हों तब भी सोसाइटी नहीं चलने लगी. So this is his big contribution, that sometimes non-virtuous imperatives, impulses, passions or whatever you have can lead to virtuous outcomes. सोचो इसके बारे में कि हम जो ये आर्ग्यूमेंट हर वक्त करते हैं कि नहीं, he wasn't really sincere, he did it for his own interest. अगर उसने इंडिया से दोस्ती की तो उसने अपने मुफाद के लिए की. इसके बरक्स जो आर्ग्यूमेंट है वो ये, डजंट मैटर उसने अपने मुफाद के लिए की, हमें इससे परवाह नहीं कि उसने अपने मुफाद के लिए की कि नहीं की. हम ये नहीं देखना चाहते कि उसकी नीयत क्या थी, उसका अपना मुफाद था या नहीं. हमें एग्जामिन करना है कि उसका ओवरऑल सोसाइटी पे क्या इम्पैक्ट हुआ. हो सकता है उसने प्योरली सेल्फिश पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से काम किया हो, मगर उसका इम्पैक्ट सोसाइटी पे क्या है, अच्छा है या बुरा है. और हो सकता है कोई दूसरा बंदा है जो प्योरली एक बहुत ही सेल्फलेस मोटिवेशन से कोई काम कर रहा है, मगर उसका ओवरऑल इम्पैक्ट सोसाइटी पे बहुत ही नेगेटिव है. ऐसे भी हो सकता है. ये बड़ी अजीब सी आर्ग्यूमेंट है, बिकॉज हमने रिलीजियस डिस्कोर्स में हम हमेशा इसके ऑपोजिट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू एक्सेप्ट करते हैं. वो ये है कि जिसकी नीयत अच्छी होगी उसका आउटकम भी अच्छा होगा. यहां पे उलट आर्ग्यूमेंट है कि नीयत और आउटकम का कोई ताल्लुक ही नहीं है ऑलमोस्ट. नीयत सेल्फिश, आउटकम पॉजिटिव. नीयत सेल्फलेस, आउटकम नेगेटिव भी हो सकता है. आउटकम एंड नीयत आर नॉट रिलेटेड. ऑफ कोर्स नीयत एंड the reward in the hereafter is related, but in the economy it's not necessarily related to each other. Well, Marx is appreciating him because Marx is often misunderstood as somebody who's always advocating being selfless. Marx never says that. In fact, in a very famous passage, which I'll send it to you, in the critique of the Gotha program, he criticizes the people who are all constantly saying, and also in the German ideology, he criticizes all the people who are saying, oh, to be selfless, communists are selfless, communists are selfless. He's like, what the hell are you talking about? He's like, to be selfish is actually an important aspect of your individuality. When a child says no to her mother or father, the child asserts their individuality, their own choices. Without that, you don't develop as an individual. Marx acknowledges that. So Marx acknowledges that in human development, there are both aspects, because we are social creatures, we need each other to live, and to work with each other to live, we have to be selfless at some level. But there are also boundaries. We have to say, okay, this is what I can do for you, but I can't do this for you, I'm sorry. Because this now is infringing on my boundary of what is essential to me. So Marx does not believe that communism is, for Marx, is not a system of altruism. A huge misconception that everybody has, which is spread by the opponents of Marxism, obviously. Okay, Marx expects everybody to be selfless, and that's impossible because people are also selfish, or people are only selfish, and therefore Marx is a utopia. किस किताब से कोट करके दिखाओ किस किताब में मार्क्स ने ये लिखा है कि society should be selfless. Wrong. And in the case of Mandeville specifically, he is appreciating the fact कि उसने जो पोर्ट्रेल किया है ना इंग्लिश सोसाइटी का, कि वो कैसे चल रही है, प्रीस्ट क्या कर रहे हैं, और जो लॉयर्स है वो क्या कर रहे हैं, और जो पॉलिटिशियंस है वो क्या कर रहे हैं, और जो आवाम है वो किस तरह कंप्लेन करी जा रही है, हर बंदा चीट भी कर रहा है, और ये सब कुछ. सो उसने पोर्ट्रेल किया है, कहता है ये बिल्कुल ऐसे ही है सोसाइटी जैसे इसने पोर्ट्रे की है. मुझे तो ऐसे लग रहा है मैंडेविल ने आज की पाकिस्तान की कहानी सुना दी हमें. हाँ, हर जगह यही हो रहा है ना, और हर जगह हम कंप्लेन भी कर रहे हैं कि ख़त्म हो जाए और हर बंदा ऑनेस्ट हो जाए तो सब ठीक हो जाएगा. सबसे बड़ा सोल्यूशन ही हमें ये प्रेजेंट दिया जाता है, सब ईमानदार हो जाए सब ठीक हो जाएगा. किसने ये कहा था? इमरान खान. कौन है सबसे पॉपुलर पॉलिटिशियन टुडे इन पाकिस्तान? इमरान खान. क्या नैरेटिव सबसे पॉपुलर है पूरे पाकिस्तान में आज? यही कि भाई ईमानदार हो जाए सब ठीक हो जाएगा, सिंसियर हो जाए, ऑनेस्ट हो जाएगा, सब ठीक हो जाएगा, बस. इसके अलावा कुछ नहीं चाहिए. मैं अपने अंकल से भी जो बात करता हूँ, और अभी मैं जहाज़ पे वापस आ रहा था, तो जहाज़ में वापस आ रहा था, मेरे साथ एक एल्डरली जेंटलमैन बैठे हुए थे, ही जस्ट स्ट्रक अप अ कन्वर्सेशन विद मी एक्सेट्रा. तो बोर हो रहे थे दोनों. तो मुझे कहता है आप क्या करते हैं? मैं प्रोफेसर हूँ. किस चीज़ के? मैं पॉलिटिकल. ओह अच्छा, पॉलिटिकल साइंस. कहाँ पढ़ाते हैं? लम्स. ओह अच्छा, लम्स. अच्छा बताएं सोसाइटी के साथ गलत क्या है? मैं कहा यार मैं कहाँ से शुरू करूँगा. तो मैं सर बस बड़े मसले हैं, अयूब खान ये वो, थोड़ा सा मैंने 5 मिनट दे दिए. तो कहता है पता है सर मेरा क्या ख्याल है? मैं कहा जी बताइए. लोग मुझे वैसे सर कह देते हैं, हालांकि मेरे से बड़े भी होते हैं बार. खैर पता है सर मेरा क्या ख्याल है, गलत क्या है? मैं कहा क्या सर आप बताएं. हम मुखलिस नहीं हैं. अगर हम मुखलिस हो जाए ना, हम में से कोई भी मुखलिस नहीं है, अगर हम मुखलिस हो जाए ना तो सब ठीक हो जाए. मैंने क्या जवाब दिया? मैंने ये नहीं कहा सर मैंडेविल को पढ़ लें, मैंने ये कहा सर आप बिल्कुल ठीक कह रहे हैं आप बिल्कुल ठीक कह रहे हैं, मुखलिसी का मसला है। तो क्योंकि ऑब्वियसली मैं आई वाज मेकिंग स्मॉल टॉक, अब मैं वहाँ पे पूरा सेमिनार तो नहीं शुरू करने लगा था कि जहाज में बैठा हुआ कि मैं उनको बताऊँ सर एक्चुअली इफ स्टडी दिस आर्ग्यूमेंट्स तो ये मैंने कहा यार छोड़ दे बेचारे को, मैं कहा सर आप बिल्कुल ठीक कह रहे हैं। तो ये जो है ना, ये वाइड स्प्रेड डिस्कोर्स है सोसाइटी के अंदर कि बस मुखलिस हो जाओ तो सब ठीक हो जाएगा। बट आई इन माई ओपिनियन ये जो नैरेटिव है उसकी उसने धज्जियाँ उड़ा दी हैं और उसने कहा कि इट्स नॉट सो सिंपल। ठीक है, इसका ये मतलब नहीं कि करप्ट हो जाओ सब ठीक हो जाए। प्लीज़ मोहम्मद हैं, आज सर मैंने ये सीखा कि करप्शन बड़ी अच्छी चीज़ है, डॉक्टर तैमूर रहमान के पास में मैंने सीखा कि करप्शन बड़ी चीज़, ये नहीं मैं कह रहा, मगर मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि इकोनॉमी को ठीक करने के लिए इज़ नॉट अ क्वेश्चन ऑफ मुखलिसी वर्सेस गैर मुखलिसी एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट, इट्स other questions of structure, of policy, of examining classes, the division of labor, the fabric of society, how it's come together. These are the things that we have to analyze and discuss. All right, that's it for today. Thank you.